If you're just joining us, I bought and remodeled this old house in central Utah and moved into it. This is my daughter's room, and she turned 20 years old this year. I've always planned on helping her buy a cheap fixer-upper house and remodel it like I did, but home prices in our area have skyrocketed over the past few years, combined with high interest rates and rising inflation, making the dream of home ownership almost impossible for first-time home buyers. So rather than crying about it, we decided to resort to Plan B, a bit of a house hack, you might say. When I remodeled the place, I built this nice little walk-in closet and a separate bathroom with this custom tile shower. So what we decided to do is cut a doorway right here that comes out right here into this storage area and add a kitchenette, small living room, and laundry. Hi everyone and welcome back. If you caught the last video, I finished the shelving, hung the second closet door, and installed the jamb on the doorway from the entry to the living room area. In this video, I'm going to get started by building a jamb to cover up this ugly brick where I cut the doorway, install door casings, install shiplap on the TV wall, and who knows what else, so let's get into it. Before I can build and install a jamb, I need to cut these 1x2s to length and nail them on the bedroom side of the opening for nailing purposes. Basically, I'm just tucking them in the wall on the back side of the drywall, using my framing square to make sure they're flush with the cut and square with the framing on the other side. I used my 16 gauge brad nailer with 2-inch nails to fasten it in place. And pretty much repeated the process on the other side. For the jamb material, I'm using this 1/2-inch MDF. I know I'm going to get some grief about not using wood from some viewers, but it paints up so nice and I've had good luck with it. I decided to make my cuts outside since this stuff is so dusty dirty when you cut it. And hey, check it out, the snow's finally melted. I'm still a ways behind on my editing, as you might have guessed. And after getting all the parts and pieces cut to size, I decided to bring them back inside so I could assemble them on a nice flat surface. Before gluing and nailing them together, I used my palm sander with some 120 grit paper to sand the edges and ease the inside corners just enough to take the sharp corner off. Time to put it all together. I used wood glue and nailed it with my 16 gauge brad nailer. I used 1¼ nails this time instead of the 2-inch, just so they didn't curl out the side and add to my paint prep later. Normally when I assemble a door jamb, I'll make it slightly narrower than the rough opening, then use shims to level and square it up. In this instance, I took extra care in making sure the framing is right on, so I can nail it directly to the studs and not lose any width on the door opening. I did end up using one shim to slightly lift the leg that wasn't yet nailed to level up the header before I finished nailing it off. Much better, right? Ugly brick gone. I picked up several pieces of this 3-inch wide door casing. Style choice was easy because I just matched the existing that I installed a few years ago when I remodeled the rest of the place. I figured the best place to start is this little closet door in the laundry room. The first thing I like to do is measure the distance between the jambs and then add 3/8 of an inch to the measurement to allow for a reveal on the casings. I'll show you why that's advantageous when we get to the paint prep caulking part of the project. Next, I measure the legs. This measurement doesn't have to be super tight to the floor. The thickness of the flooring gives us a little leeway. The first thing I like to do when installing the casings is nail the header piece in place with 2-inch brad nails. I centered it before nailing and left a 3/16 reveal on each side, hence the extra 3/8 inch long that I added when cutting. After a test fit to make sure the angles fit right, I used some wood glue on the joint and nailed off the casing legs, making sure to maintain the 3/16 reveal. And after installing a few more casings, it's time to get into the shiplap. That dang Chip and Joanna. The first thing I need to do is establish a level line for my first course. I use my 6-foot level rather than measuring off the floor because the floor in this old house isn't perfect, you might say. After making a few pencil marks, I chalked a line to follow for the first course, then used my level to plumb up and mark the studs behind the drywall for nailing. And the first piece fits like a glove. Almost. It was a bit tight. I had to take a blade's width off. To fasten it to the wall, I'm using 2-inch brad nails. Some are in the face of the board, and I'll have to spackle them later before painting. The nails in the top will be covered and concealed by the next row that goes on top of it. This third row has a couple of things I need to mark out and cut. One being the electrical outlet, and the other spot is under the door where I need to cut a little bit off the top. In the area to the right of the door, the measurements were all the same, so I went into mass production mode. I cut all the pieces needed and nailed them up until I got to the TV outlet that needed to be cut out. Before cutting and nailing the short pieces on the left-hand side of the door, I decided to use my level and make a mark lined up with the top row as a reference point to make sure everything lines up coming across the top of the door. Every once in a while, a brad nail happens to land directly on top of a drywall screw, and this happens. Fortunately, the door casing will cover it. On this last piece, I decided to scribe it to the ceiling, kind of like I did the shelving if you caught the last video. I basically traced the slight up and downs from the ceiling onto the board and freehand it through the table saw, trying to get a nice fit that will caulk up nice and pretty later on. Look at that nice tight fit. Mission accomplished. And the wall looks awesome too. I take back that comment about Chip and Joanna. Earlier I mentioned these casings I'm using are 3 inches wide. I used a table saw to rip down some of the casings that needed to be narrower to fit. After cutting them to length, I glued and nailed them in place and finished the shiplap wall by casing out the door. Last but not least are the casings on this bedroom door. I've already ripped them on the table saw, so all that's left is to cut them to length and nail them in place. And that's pretty much a wrap on this video. I did feel bad that I didn't get any footage of Benny or the grandpuppies, so we'll finish up with the puppies pestering Benny, and the look on his face explains the rest.